So, Jim, it's always a real pleasure to speak to you ahead of the Senior Bowl, and it's looking like another really interesting class. So, to start off, can you give us a bit of an overview of the seniors this year and what we can expect?
Yeah, Rob, good to be back on with you, man. Love coming on with you. I would say, yeah, another strong year. We only had a couple players decline the invite this year. Cedric Tillman, Tennessee, a lot of them were injury related. Um, Unfortunately, we just lost a tight end, Dalton Kincaid from Utah, who's a good player. But all in all, really strong year. We were excited about the running back group. I'm kind of peeking over the phone right now at the board a little bit. I'm cheating on you. The running back group we really like. Kenny McIntosh from Georgia was a big get for us. We hadn't really tapped that Georgia running back room over the years. Going back to my time in Seattle, like that draft with before my time here at the Senior Bowl when I was in Seattle, that Sony Michel, Nick Chubb draft. Those guys were both seniors. Last year with James Cook and Zamir White, we didn't get either of those guys. So again, Kenny was a good one, and like Chase Brown from Illinois is a really good player. The tight end, I said we lost Dalton Kincaid, but Luke Musgrave at the tight end position was our top tight end. I think we really wiped out the top player at every position on the board except for outside linebacker, and that was Nolan Smith, and he's been hurt all year at Georgia, and he can't really participate. But Tyree Wilson at defensive end, Devin Witherspoon at corner, across the board, we've knocked it out pretty good.
You've mentioned already so many interesting players on Kenny McIntosh. I think when the head coach comes out and calls him out, I won't say the words that he described him as, but he basically called him a BAMF. And when you have your head coach saying that, I always kind of find that interesting. And with Luke Musgrave, I wanted to ask you about him because he just looks like a player you can imagine the league loving. How much potential does he have? Because he seems to be somebody that maybe the media doesn't talk about as much, but when you watch him, there's so much to like. And a great athlete.
Great athlete. Only played in a couple games this year, so there's not a lot of tape out there from 2022. He's a guy that I was out in LA at the NFL Network studios last week with Daniel Jeremiah, and he's plugged into that West Coast scene pretty good. Knows a lot of coaches out there, and he said there's word that he might run in the 4.4s at 6'6", 260 pounds. Which if he does that, I mean, the guy's probably going to go in the first round. So he just not a huge body of work this year. That's why this week is so important for him. And then to Kenny McIntosh, I would echo Kirby there. Yeah, he is a bad MFer. Just with he's so explosive. I think we saw it in the college football playoff. There was a couple of those plays against Ohio State where guys that are that big and thick and rocked up usually don't have that immediate gear that Kenny's got. So again, in the passing game, they used him a ton. As a detached route runner, he'll really show out during Senior Bowl weekends in the pass game stuff. And I think that's where he's going to go from a guy that was used in a rotation heavily at Georgia. I think he's going to open teams' eyes to be like, well, this guy could be a frontline every down back for us.
You don't see many human beings that look like Tyree Wilson. So how good could he be at the next level?
Yeah, that's the scary part is, we used to, when I was in New England, we used to refer to guys, say, guys, they don't grow on trees. And Tyree definitely doesn't grow on trees. He's, arm length is like 36 inches. The wingspan's 86, 87. So from a frame perspective, not many guys like him. And really the scary part is his best football is kind of way in front of him. He's long, he's explosive. That combination is really hard to find. And so again, there's games where he's the guy, if you grade the flashes, he looks like a top 10 pick. And usually when you get up into that area, you're trying to draft guys that you won't have a chance of getting later in the draft or hitting on. You're not going to hit on a guy like Tyree Wilson. They won't be around later. So I do think teams are going to, he's going to be somewhere settle in that top 10 to top 15 area this year's draft.
12 months since we last had a conversation, and you mentioned this highly athletic cornerback from the University of Texas San Antonio called Tyree Wilson, who you believed had extreme talent and potential. So I've got a nice, easy question for you here, Jim. Are there any players in this senior class that have just got that, fantastic physical profile, maybe just need some guidance and development to potentially surprise a few people next season? Perhaps not quite to the extent that Tyree Wilson has, because he's been fantastic, but have maybe got enough about them to flash early in their career.
Yeah, I'm cheating again on you. Tariq was it was really cool watching Tariq do what he did. I mean, I thought I didn't think he'd get out of day 2. I thought, it'd be because of the rawness, and I can see where some teams didn't think he would be able to get on the field right away, just because he'd only played corner there at UTSA for a couple of years. I could see that. I'm not knocking the teams, but any guy that's 6'3" and change, and with that length and running 4.26, again, the whole don't grows on trees factor, I thought would push him up into the third round at minimum. So it was awesome seeing Pete and John get him in the 5th round and seeing what he did, leading the league in picks and all that. But no, I don't know. Looking at again, I think a guy like Andre Carter at Army as a guy would probably fall into a similar category as Tariq, in that, I think teams view him as developmental to a degree. He needs to put on weight. He needs to add bulk. He needs to add strength. And coming from West Point and one of the service academies, I think that's where teams think he can do that. Obviously, it's a different regimen there than it would be at a normal football factory college. So this is the pre-draft process will be huge for Andre. He had whatever it was last year, 14.5 sacks. The production dipped a little bit this year. He was getting a lot more extra attention, but I talked about the explosiveness and the length stood out with Tyree Wilson. It's really the agility and the length stand out with Andre Carter. I mean, he really has almost like a basketball player skill set. When you watch him play, like I just envision him running the court and fast breaking and throwing down dunks. I mean, he's really light on his feet, and that's how he wins a lot as a pass rusher. He can kind of dance in front of guys and dance around guys. So when he adds that bulk and the strength, that's where you're going to see the pass rush take off. So that's maybe one guy, Rob, is kind of off the top of my head.
What's the defensive line class like this time around? Who are the players that are, we turn on Senior Bowl and we're watching those amazing 1v1s. Who do you think are the guys that we really need to be focusing on here?
Yeah, it's another good edge group. I felt like last year's group with Boye and Mafe, and there was just a bunch of guys, and Arnold Ebiketie. There was a bunch of guys that I think are going to break through and be good rushers in years 2 and 3. It's really hard to get on the field and get sack production, which makes what like Aiden Hutchinson and James Houston did this year in Detroit so impressive. But this year's group, I mean, you've got like Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame. Derek Hall from Auburn is a guy that's really powerful and with straight line speed. I think KJ Henry is going to surprise people down here from Clemson. But one guy, when you talk about, like in that same question you asked about Andre, and I answered Andre Carter, I would say Keon White from Georgia Tech. I mean, Keon's a guy that you're always, whenever you, as a scout, when you describe a guy that he has like smaller man movement ability, that's usually a really cool thing. And Keon's, last time I checked in with their staff at Georgia Tech was probably in November, and he was like 292, 293. And when you put on the tape, he moves like a 260-pound guy. There's a couple clips on tape this year. One, the last game against Georgia, and then I want to say the other game was Virginia, but he's like running with wheel routes down the field, like stride for stride with Kenny McIntosh, which is insane. And the cool thing about him is he's really a natural pass rusher. You see a lot of guys where you can see that is when their first move gets stymied and they have to transition to that second move. Some guys they get stalemated, they get cut off, they die in the rush. And he knows how to keep himself alive, whether it's like spinning out of stuff or cross facing and countering. He's just got a really good feel for that. I think you saw that a bunch in the Clemson game. So I think Keon's a guy that is just scratching the surface as well, and he's going to be a handful in those one-on-ones.
Yeah, I love watching him. That wheel route stuff. I mean, that's infamous on social media now. People talking about that all the time. Just such a great player. 20% pass rush win rate as well. Fantastic.
Well, I think, yeah, I should say this too. Talk about defensive instincts. We had a guy in the Senior Bowl a few years ago, O'Shane Zimenez from Old Dominion. And Keon was jumping off the tape that year, and we're all sitting around as a group watching. I asked, one of our young scouting assistants, like, what year is this kid? I forget what number Keon was wearing at the time. And he was like a redshirt freshman, and he'd played tight end the year before. So this is a guy in his first year on the defensive side of the ball. I think he had 19 tackles for loss at ODU that year, which tells you, which screams instincts. If you're switching sides of the field and you're instinctive enough to have 19 tackles for loss, you don't luck your way into that. Like at some point you got to be able to locate the football. So again, I just think he's still really relatively young as a defensive player. So I just think he's another guy kind of just scratching the surface.
There's a couple of other defenders I wanted to just pick your brains on. My pronunciation may be terrible on this, so apologies, Jim. Ade Tamiwa, Ade Baware from Northwestern. Another, he's got a lot of physical potential, but what do you see there with him?
I would say you did a better job there, Rob, than I would. We've been calling him Ade in the office because I really hate butchering people's names. I really do. So when and I know the guys at Northwestern call him Tommy. So when he gets here to Mobile, I'm going to make sure I pull him aside and get that pronunciation down. But again, you talk about a high-end athlete. I don't know if you follow Bruce Feldman on Twitter. He does the freaks list every year, which has been a kind of a big part of the scouting thing. And we've helped Bruce with that list the last couple of years here at the Senior Bowl. That's why you've seen it go from like 50 to 100. And maybe there's just more freaks out there. Maybe there's just more athletic dudes out there now. But he was on that list. And so for a guy his size, that's going to broad jump 10-8, something like that at 200 and 80-ish pounds. I think the big thing where he was thinking about coming back to school. Well, I talked to Pat Fitzgerald, the head coach at Northwestern, in early November, and he was a little on the fence on what to do because he projects as more of a 3 technique at the next level. He's more of an edge player at Northwestern, but he's not overly long, and really just the twitch and the quickness inside over guards. He's going to be such a mismatch. So I think the feeling was, from a Northwestern perspective, let's get this guy back. Let's get him to 295 pounds. Let's play him exclusively at 3 techniques so he can show that. So I think that was their plan. And I think any NFL team that watches his tape is going to have the same plan. It'll just be next year, it'll be in the league. So he's going to be inside some in the pass rush stuff and one-on-ones so he can show that quickness. I just think he's going to be such a mismatch. And I think he'll have a good week here. And then obviously if the testing stuff is what if they claimed it to be, then he's going to blow up the combine as well.
There is actually 2 other players I wanted to quickly ask you about. One of them is Byron Young at Alabama, who I just really enjoyed watching and feel that maybe he's flown a little bit under the radar. And Zach Harrison, who's obviously had great physical testing in his past at high school, maybe hasn't had the consistent production in college, but looks the part when he turns it on. What can you tell us about those 2 players?
Yeah, but we have two Byron Youngs this year. We've got Alabama Byron Young and Tennessee Byron Young. So we had Tennessee Byron Young was in the office a couple of days ago watching tape with the staff, watching the guys he's going to be going up against in practice. But the Alabama BY, he is an underrated guy. He is kind of flying under some radars. And I'll just pull it back to last year. We had Phil Mathis in the game from Alabama, his former teammate. And just to compare the 2 guys, I think Byron's a little more versatile in terms of to move him around scheme and front, depending on what front you play. And I think he's a little more dynamic off the snap. So, and Phil's a really good player. That's no knock on Phil Mathis at all. He went in the 2nd round. Phil went in the 2nd round of the Washington Commanders. So if he went in the 2nd, that's where I think Byron Young is going to end up, somewhere in that 2nd round range, maybe more. Maybe if he comes down here and has a good week rushing the passer. But to start the year, we had 3 Alabama defensive linemen on our board. One's going back to school. We ended up with he and DJ Dale, Byron and DJ in the game. So that'll be fun to watch him in one-on-ones because I do think that he has some upfield quickness to work with. And then Zach Harrison, you brought it up. I mean, the high school testing stuff. He was a 10,700 meter guy. You can Google his high school track stuff, and it's almost comical to watch this 6'5", 260-pound high school guy running against in the 100-meter dash against a bunch of guys that are 100 pounds smaller than him and him whooping them. So probably going to be the best combination of size, speed in the draft. And as you said, the production hasn't been great over his career, but I really feel like about mid-October through the end of the year, he played his best football. I thought November was a really good month for Zach. It was just starting to click for him, and he looked more flexible for whatever reason. I don't know if he was working on that. I haven't talked to Zach about it, but we had some issues with his lower body flexibility watching junior tape, and that seemed to improve too. So yeah, I mean, certainly a high ceiling player, and looking forward to getting him down here in those one-on-ones as well.
Jim, what do you think of the senior quarterback class this year?
It has been a crazy ride with that quarterback class. We started the year and there was an abundance of names in that quarterback column. I mean, way more than we would have known what to do with. And just through the NIL stuff, people ask all the time, what's the NIL done? Well, it's got a bunch of these quarterbacks going back to school. So, just to kind of share what our board looked like, I mean, up top, we had Will Levis as the top senior. He was like really our only guy on day one or day two. And then we started the year, we started off with like Bo Nix and Hendon Hooker just under that, kind of in the fourth round. We felt like both those guys elevated. We pushed both those guys up into the day two range. Now Hendon got hurt. Bo's going back to school for another year. So we lost out on those guys. And then we invite Keaton Slovis from Pitt, and now he's in the portal. And he's going to BYU. So it's kind of a crazy class, but where we're at with the group, I do like the group. There are some guys that have really elevated. One being like Max Duggan from TCU. To start the year, we had Max and right on that 7th round priority free agent cut line. And now we've got him up and he's like 4th, 5th round, and that's where he is for most teams as well. So he's a guy we're excited to get down here. He made a really nice jump on tape this year. And yeah, I mean, down the list, Jaron Hall, I think all the guys in our game this year, Jake Hainer from Fresno, Jaron Hall from BYU, Clayton Tune at Houston, Duggan, Tyson Badgett from Shepherd. When you talk to the teams, they're all in that 4th to 6th round range. And now let's see, that's where they're starting the process, and that's where Jalen Hurts started the process a couple of years ago. He was down here and all the teams had him in the 4th or the 5th round, and we did too. And there were some teams asking and some people in the media asking us if we were going to play him at running back that week. And now how crazy does that sound? I mean, the guy's played his way into a franchise contract deal this year. So it's going to be a fun group because they're all kind of in the same mix. It's going to be fun competition and seeing who elevates out of that group. And we've got one more quarterback spot left, and that we'll be announcing that this week. That'll be a fun one as well.
Can I ask you about Will Levis? I've interviewed him. He's a good guy. Did a lot of positive things at Kentucky. What's your take on him? Is he going to be part of the Senior Bowl this year? And just generally, what do you think about him?
Yeah, I've had a few opportunities to meet Will and see Will throw live in game, and then at the Manning camp last summer. Still working through whether he's going to come. So he's dealing with a foot thing right now. And that's why he missed, the end of the season, missed the bowl game. And he's been dealing with that. He's trying to get that right. Obviously, feet are a big part of the quarterback. I was always taught it starts from the feet up when you watch a quarterback. So start watching his feet. And so if your feet aren't 100%, it's going to be hard for you to come down here and look great. And I think that's what Will's concerned with right now. But big picture, going back to the Manning exposure, I thought he and Anthony Richardson at that camp that day, from a physical tools perspective, the couple days I was there were kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the group. CJ Stroud was not there, but Bryce Young was there. And really the rest of the class was almost there. Jake Hainer wasn't there. Jaron Hall wasn't there, but there was a lot of good players. But those guys clearly, from just a physical standpoint, in terms of body type, arm strength, they're what you're looking for, Will and Anthony. So I think when it comes to both those guys, you can probably lump both of them together. It's just, kind of a mental processing instincts, like what happens when things get muddy and stuff's flying around. So, I felt like this week's perfect for Will. He could come down here and really throw the ball well in drills, the 1-on-1s, the 7-on-7s. There's no blitzing in the Senior Bowl. We play a lot of vanilla coverage. So I really thought the week set up perfectly for Will's strengths and maybe minimize the perceived weaknesses. But so we'll see. So hopefully he decides to come. But I think that's where the league is. I think there's a question of when things break down, does he have that Sandlot ability to run around and see it and make improvisational plays that you've heard a lot of, Josh Allen comparisons with Will Levis. Well, that's what Josh does, and he does it as good as anybody. So to me, that's a tough comparison because that's something I know a lot of teams think Will lacks. And that's something that makes Josh Allen, Josh Allen.
Just a couple of other things I want to ask you about, Jim. First of all, linebackers. Who are the names that we really need to watch out for in Mobile this week, in this year?
There's going to be a lot of speed at the linebacker position, and probably two of them stand out. DeMarvion Overshown from Texas, and Deion Henley from Washington State. I'll probably start with those two guys as like off-the-ball stacked linebackers. And even Dorian Williams, to that matter, from Tulane. I mean, those guys can really run sideline to sideline. I think DeMarvion, we've been watching him for like 3 years. He was committed to come to the game last year and went back to school. he's gotten better every year. You know, he went there as a safety, so some of the stuff closer to line of scrimmage has been a little bit of a process, but he has gotten steadily better. And Dan Henley made a massive jump this year. I mean, I think he's one of those classic cases of a guy that really took advantage of the portal. He made a good decision. He found a defense he fits in, and you just love how the way the guy plays. I mean, he's downhill, he's innately physical. He runs, he hits, he plays with energy. He's a great blitzer. Like, so Deion Henley's a guy that both those guys really, they both play great energy. Like, I love watching guys when I watch them on tape and see them just fly around. I always picture what's that going to look like on our practice field, because we need guys to come down here and really be tone setters. And I think both those guys will do that.
Can we give some attention to Jonathan Mingo at Ole Miss? It feels like a lot of people are sleeping on him.
Yeah, big, fast, strong. So he is a grown man when you get up on him. I mean, not to compare him to DK and AJ Brown, guys that, you know, former Ole Miss guys, but at least physically he's in that same vein. This is a big, strapped up, good looking guy. You know, he was getting a lot of attention, you know, the second half of the year, and they started to go to Heath more. Malik Heath, the Mississippi State transfer. So Mingo's numbers were down. Like, I went to the LSU game and they were just targeting the heck out of Heath, and Mingo caught a big ball early down the field. But no, in terms of a big fluid athlete, it's hard to find guys with his frame and his thickness that can drop their weight and have that fluid stride and can get on top of you. So it'll be a big week for him. You're right. Like, you don't hear a lot of Mingo talk. So it'll be interesting to see how he comes out of the week. He's going to be a handful in one-on-ones if you try to press him. He's a really big dude.
JL Skinner is just such a fun player to watch. I wondered if you could sort of share some thoughts on him, and also Chris Smith at Georgia, who has just had a fantastic season, hasn't he, for the Bulldogs?
Yeah, so starting with Skinner, from a measurable standpoint, he's really similar to Cam Chancellor, coming out minus about 15 pounds. They're both like 6'0", 3'3". We're in that range, but they're so different players. I mean, they're just very, very different guys. I mean, Cam's unique. I've got a soft spot for Cam for all the winning he did when we were in Seattle. That's one of my favorite guys ever, and maybe the most physical player I've ever been around. The teams I've worked for, maybe, you know, probably Rodney Harrison and Cam Chancellor are the two most physical players I've been around. So he's not that, but he's a taller guy at 6'3.5". And what makes him a little different from Cam, he can play from depth, whereas Cam struggled back there. This guy, you can play him from depth, and he sees it pretty well, and he's got range back there. And then he's also, you know, got the size to come up and insert and do good things as he gets closer to the line of scrimmage. So he was a fun one. We're excited to get JL. And then Chris Smith is a guy that made a really big jump for us last year. From last year, we didn't invite Chris last year. He did not. He fell below the line for us for last year's game. I think we ended up with him in the 6th round. Right now, looking up there, we've got him in the 3rd. He was kind of fringe top 100. I think, you know, he's just undersized. When you see him, he looks like a corner. He's like 185 pounds. But I think this process is going to be really good to him because he's so cerebral. You talk to the guys at Georgia, they do so much on defense, kind of, you know, they're carrying over what Kirby brought from Tuscaloosa. There's so much volume and there's so many checks and addendums. And I mean, you got to be really smart to run that show. And he's that guy for Georgia. So I think this interview process, he's going to knock it out of the park. And when I say he made a jump this year, like, it wasn't just his play and him making more plays. He looked like a better athlete too. He looked quicker. He looked more explosive. And I think, you know, just talking to the guys there, that he had a full year in the weight room. He had a full off season in the weight room. And I don't know, injury stuff in the past has kind of, you know, derailed him a little bit in that area. But again, he just looked more athletic. He looked like a guy, you know, if I would have projected him last year, I would have said this guy's going to be a solid backup level player, instinctive guy that kind of hangs around on special teams, and you want him in the room because he's so smart. If you got to plug him in at multiple spots, mentally he can retain and handle it. And now he looks like a guy that could be a year 1 starter for a team. So really, really cool that Chris came back and led those guys to, and was a captain on a back-to-back national championship team.
And the very last thing I want to ask about, Jim, is people will not forgive me if I don't ask about interior O-line. So, you know, who are some of the names in those 1v1s, centers, guards, who could really put on a show?
Yeah, I mean, I'd start with Osiris Torrance from Florida. I'll be interested to see how Osiris does. You know, he's a big guy for your Seahawk fans. You know, we had Damian Lewis in the game. a couple of years ago, and Damien's had it, started from get-go up there and is doing a nice job. And this guy's another big body. I think he fits what Seattle wants. He's going to fit more gap scheme team. He's just a big, wide body. He can play square. He's hard to get around. He's hard to work his edges. He's just a big, sturdy, thick guy. So he's up there. We've got a nice center class. I mean, there's some good centers, but a name to keep an eye on that I'm curious to see how he looks down here is Nick Saldiveri from Old Dominion. Played mostly tackle there at ODU, and they came down here to Mobile the last game of the year, the Saturday after our Thanksgiving, and I went up to the stadium to meet him during pregame. He got frickin' food poisoning that morning at like 5 a.m. So he was throwing his guts up all morning. He was getting IV, so he didn't even play in the game, but he came out of the locker room to meet me, and he is a big, good-looking guy now. I mean, he is. I think scouts had told me, they're like, wait till you see him. And he's a really good-looking guy. I think his best home might be center. I really do. The initial quickness, the lateral quickness, the ability in space, just the overall mobility of the player, like, I think is really cool. I think so. He's going to rep at guard and center during the week. I think we're going to play him at all three spots and see how it looks. And we've had some guys over the last couple of years, like Robert Hainsey, who started all year at center for the Bucks, was really a right tackle, did some guard work at Notre Dame, that came here, and he looked better at center during our week than he ever looked at tackle or guard, in my opinion, at Notre Dame. And then, the classic stories like Quinn Miners coming down from Wisconsin Whitewater, never playing center in his life in a competitive environment. So we'll stick Nick in there and see what that looks like.
Jim, it's always an absolute pleasure. One of my favorite parts of the year to have a conversation with you ahead of the Senior Bowl. I'm sure it's going to be a great event. Best of luck with it all, and can't wait to watch.
Well, Rob, I always love coming on, man. I love sitting with someone that knows football and asks good questions, so you make it easy on me.